Quick overview. We're going to talk about why we want to prototype. We're going to talk about some tools that are out there for prototyping, and then we're actually going to get into the weeds a little bit, and we're going to go into Figma, which is a tool that we use a lot to cover some prototyping tips and setting up prototypes and how to build those out. If you're joining us on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe, stay up to date on all our future videos like this one. We put everything that we record or do live is hosted up there. If you're on Zoom today, make sure to connect with Headway on either Twitter, Instagram, Dribbble, or any other social network. Find us on LinkedIn. We try to share all our content out there as much as possible. So let's get into it. So why is prototyping important? Prototyping is a critical part of our design process here at Headway. We find ourselves doing it all the way through the process, all the way from the smallest, just trying to figure out a small idea to see how it works, during the high-level wireframing stages, really just through the entire process. We spend a lot of time prototyping, and you don't really realize it until you're sort of in it and doing it. Static screens are great. And they look beautiful, but until you can touch something and see how it actually feels, we don't really know how good the design might be. Now, there's a ton of other reasons you might want to prototype out your designs, other than just getting the feel of it. We're going to briefly cover at least the top 3 reasons we think to create prototypes outside of just you getting a feel of how things work. And then we're going to go over some of those tools, like I said, to create prototypes. And then finally, like I said, we'll jump into Figma. So one of the most common things for prototyping is just getting early validation on an idea. It's one of the most, like I said, common reasons to start up a prototype. It's just easier to see a vision when you're clicking through something that feels tangible and feels real. This allows us to start asking some critical questions early in our design process. We can send it out to friends, family, other designers. Does this feel right? Are we doing early user interviews? How do they like it? Would they pay for this product? Is this a feature they would use? It's hard for them a lot of people to wrap their mind around a product until they have something that feels real and feels tangible. A lot of times we can walk users through flows and we can talk hypothetical about stuff. But once we get some things into the design space and actually get something that they can work through, we can start to get some early validation in those ideas and get some early feedback on are we on the right track. Another prototyping aspect for us is just basic user experience testing. This is really important in our process. We leverage prototypes for this all the time when we're testing out the UX of a product. Sometimes things might feel right in the static screen, but once you start moving through the prototype, you'll get a sense of what really works and doesn't. A lot of times we'll build out prototypes and we'll talk to early users and give them a task to do in the prototype. Can they complete that task? Are they able to find what they need? Are they able to walk through it effectively and sort of like a hands-off approach? We're just kind of observing to see if they're hitting the right things that we want them to do when they're trying to complete a certain job or a certain task in the app or web app we're building. We do this like a lot when we're testing out different ideas for a few screens, or we're just trying to get a feel of a really high level flow. So this is very important when it comes to building out our products. And lastly, A/B testing. A/B testing is when we're taking 2 versions of our product with either some substantial changes or minor changes. They don't have to be anything too crazy. And we're testing to see which one performs better based on some metrics that we'll decide. So sometimes we'll build out like a prototype scorecard, or we'll want to make sure that so many people achieve a certain action that we want. And we'll take 2 different tests and see how that actually performs. Like I said, it can be a small change. Like we can just change the text on a button, some copy on a page, or it could be a completely different screen that has the same features, but we want to see which one's performing better so we can make that decision. And it's a lot easier for us to do this in the design phase and in the early validation phase than it is for developers to get involved. We can move a lot faster. We can change things live. I mean, we've updated prototypes in between sessions before. So it's things that we can just do quickly in the design tools that are out there. Saves a ton of valuable time and just really allows us, like I said, to test a bunch of theories and ideas quickly. So what are some of the tools for prototyping? There's a ton of tools out there. There's some tools that are on your phone directly, so you can actually like do prototypes on your phone. There's some that cost money and some that don't. We'll be jumping into Figma at the end. That's the tool we use the most here at Headway. That's our design tool and our primary prototyping tool. But there are some other tools out there if you're not using Figma. Figma is free. So it's something that you can download and use for free. It works in the web browser. It can be embedded into various things. You can do prototypes on your phone. So it's pretty robust in its feature set. And some of these other ones are also robust and also free that you may want to use. One that we used to use a lot was Invision. Invision is nice. Like I said, it's in the web browser. You can build prototypes in there. You upload your images, sort of your static images to it, which is the one, which is nice if you're not the designer and you don't have the design tools and maybe somebody's sending designs to you. You can hook up those screens and do different things in those screens and build out pretty robust prototypes in Invision. We used to use this a lot, but we transitioned, like I said, to Figma, since Figma allows us to use our actual designs in the prototyping tools. Adobe XD, I believe, is also free. Don't quote me on that. It was a few years ago, but it does come part of the Adobe Creative Suite, or you can pick it up as its own. This has another great prototyping suite inside of it, a lot of advanced animation features. You can go really deep on it. And if you're part of an organization that's part of the Creative Cloud, you can use Creative Cloud assets inside your prototypes. So if you're working with a team of illustrators that are in Illustrator, or things like photographers who are doing things in Lightroom, all that stuff can sync up and be brought into your Adobe XD files. So it's kind of cool in that sense. It has a really good animation suite. However, we live in the Figma space. So we're big Figma users, mostly because it allows us to do almost everything in it and we don't have to go to different tools. So that's what we'll be diving into and talking about here in a little bit. We're going to cover two types of prototyping. We're going to break this down into what I call hi-fi and lo-fi prototyping. We'll cover some general prototyping stuff. We'll get into a few advanced features, but I want this to be accessible to non-designer types or anyone who's just learning Figma. So we might not dive too deep into a specific feature, but when we get into the Q&A portion, if anyone has some questions on some specific things in setting up prototypes or how to achieve a certain thing, feel free to ask and we can go do that. Like I said, we're going to cover hi-fi and lo-fi. Hi-fi is something where the design was built in Figma. We have access to all the components. It's been built in the tool. We can get really dynamic with it because of things like Smart Animate and things that Figma allows us to do. So that's what we kind of call like a hi-fi prototype. Lo-fi is where we might not have access to everything. In fact, we might only have some screenshots and we might have to do some manual stuff in there to make it work. But you can still use Figma to build out prototypes with those sort of lo-fi assets or those static screens. So we want to make sure we show that because, for example, you might have hired a designer and they're not part of your organization. They delivered screenshots, but how could you still use that to prototype? So we'll talk about that as well. So we're going to jump into our project file here. So we're going to start with the lo-fi prototype. So if you watched Clint's talk yesterday, he was kind of showing how somebody might use Whimsical or Miro to build out a wireframe, which is a tool that non-designers can get into and build out some really cool wireframes in there, iterate quickly. However, it doesn't import into Figma, so all we have is static screenshots. So if we look in here, we're going to have these static screenshots that we can export out from that tool. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly on how to set up this prototype, and then we'll jump over to the hi-fi. Prototyping in Figma all happens in this prototyping tab right here. So you can see I'm in the design tab, and you can see all of our components and local styles are set up, but we're going to jump over to prototyping up here first. There's a couple things we want to set up right away when we're thinking about our prototypes. Right now, this is a mobile device or a mobile app that has been designed. This is the Squad Up app, and we want to make sure that it at least displays on the, if we're going to view it on a desktop, which we are right now on a device. So we're going to do this iPhone 11 Pro Max, and we'll do the space gray version. And then our prototype background color, we'll just leave that black, but you can change the background color of your prototype if you want. And then we want to start with the welcome frame. So we've got all our frames here. It's the whole list of frames, and we're going to start with welcome. So now I've set it up to, and we'll load it up here real quick. So by hitting that play button, I'm enacting the prototype. So you've set it up here. I can't really do anything yet, but we've got our first screen there. By default, it will allow you, you'll see down here, 1 of 8, to just step through the screens if you want to. But that doesn't feel real. It doesn't really accomplish too much of what we want. We want to feel a little bit more authentic. So when we're still active in the prototyping panel up here, and we click on a frame or a component, you'll notice it has a blue highlight around it. So I can actually grab this here, and now I can link this to whatever screen I want, right? So this is gonna draw a link between this frame to this other frame. And frame is Figma's version of like an artboard. It's just a way to contain different components inside of a container. So here we're saying anywhere on this screen on tap, which means just clicking the screen, we want to navigate to this other frame. We have other options that we can do in here. We can open it as an overlay. We can swap with, we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. But right now we just want to navigate to, we're gonna do it on tap. And our animation, we're just gonna do it instant, we'll just do a switch, but let's just do a move in. So we can move this in from different directions, and we'll just move it in here and have it come in from the left. You can kind of see how that looks with the little animation down there, and we're gonna do it over 300 milliseconds. So now when I come back to my prototype here and I click, you'll notice clicking anywhere in the screen will bring it over and bring that other component in there. So now this doesn't feel very real yet, right? I'm just clicking anywhere on the screen, that other screen is coming in. And what I'm doing, we want to make it feel a little bit more realistic, right? So when you're in a prototype, just a little tip, if you press R, it'll reset the prototype up to that start frame. So you'll see that's how I'm switching between these two here. So we want it to feel a little bit more realistic, right? So I'm gonna skip all the way down to, we're gonna get down to this create event thing. So when I'm hitting the skip button, that's what I wanna do. But since this is a static JPEG, I can't do that. So I'm gonna press R, which is gonna give me the rectangle tool, and I'm gonna draw a little rectangle inside of this frame, right? So we've got this rectangle here, we're gonna call it hitbox, because this is sort of my trigger. This is where I'm gonna click to do that, to trigger this action. And I'm gonna drag this down to here, and we're gonna do a navigate to, we're gonna do it on tap, and we want it to move up. So we're gonna do that there. Now you'll notice when we go to my prototype and we click through here, I've got this gray box here, and I don't want that because I still want it to feel like a real app. So we're gonna go back to this gray box real quick. We're gonna go into the design section, and we're just gonna turn the fill off. So it's still there, and we get to this screen, you'll see it highlighting where it can be clicked. And so now when I hit skip, we're gonna get to this screen here. So that's a way of how you can set up sort of these lo-fi prototypes. You don't have the screens, somebody sends them to you either in a flat format, and that's how you could get a prototype out the door. This can be tested on a mobile device. You can send this prototype with the share prototype to a friend. They can open it up in a web browser. If they're using Safari, you can scroll up on Safari to remove to sort of go into full screen mode, and they can click through the whole thing on their phone. You can also use Figma Mirror if you're on the same Wi-Fi network to test it on a phone as well. So now we could get an idea of our wireframes, and we could work through that and do some testing there. But now let's go and think about high fidelity. So high fidelity is something we've built inside of Figma. So we have all the components, we can make adjustments, we can make large scale adjustments, and we can make even small minutia adjustments here. So same app, we've gone through some iterations, we've designed it out, we've built it out, we might have migrated wireframes into here, and we have everything set up. here. So, and named like this. So one of the things that we want to do right away off the bat is we want to bring, when somebody loads up the app, we want this submit games or leagues to sort of scroll in over the top of this main screen here. Now there's a couple of ways you could do it. We're going to use an overlay and we'll kind of show how that works here. So same thing as I did before, I'm gonna go to the prototype. We are going to first click off of any of our frames so we can make sure that we set it up as a device. Space gray, and we'll leave the background black, that's fine. Main screen is a perfect starting point. So then what we wanna do is same thing as we did before. We're gonna grab this blue line here, and we're gonna drag it down to this smaller component. Now here, we don't want it to navigate to it. We want it to open an overlay. What an overlay will do is allow you to take one component and bring it over, or one frame and bring it up over the top of another frame. So here we'll open this overlay and we're going to do it bottom center, works perfectly, and we're going to have it move up. I don't want it to close, so I'm just gonna keep it open when we click on the outside here. So now when I launch this prototype, and which I will close out of this one because we gotta launch this one, each page in Figma can have its own prototype hooked up. So you can have multiple prototypes in a file. So you just have to relaunch them from the page. So now when I'm on the screen here and I click, that will show up. But I don't want to do that on a click. I want to set that up to be on a delay. I just want it to automatically happen. So we're going to go into here and we're going to do this after a delay. And a delay essentially is once you land on a frame or a screen, it'll take a little bit of time. You designate that. It's 800 milliseconds here. We're going to do 300. It will then open that overlay automatically, and then everything else will trigger it. So the overlay, we have it anchored to the bottom center. It's going to move up just like you saw before, but now it's going to do it after a delay instead of a click. So when we go into here, now it just does it automatically. I'll move my mouse out so you can see that as well. So we've got that set up. Now there's a couple other things we want to make this feel more realistic. We want to have sort of a vertical scroll for this list so we can see more than what's showing up on the screen here. So we're going to do that in the main screen here. And these are called overflow behaviors. So there's different ways to set up overflow behaviors. But what that essentially means is if you have content that exceeds the frame of the design. So I'm gonna turn clip content off and you can see I've got a bunch of more items that go below where my frame is there. You can set an overflow behavior. And the overflow behavior will allow you to do different scroll actions and move that stuff up and around and make different changes there. So for example, we can either have no scrolling, horizontal scrolling, vertical scrolling, or horizontal and vertical scrolling, which sort of gives you the ability to move on both axes. We're just going to do vertical scrolling here. So now when I launch, even though my overlay is up, I can now use and scroll on my screen here. So I can actually scroll down to different things and I can have this full list here, even though I have this overlay set up. How about some other things to make it feel a little bit more realistic is maybe we don't want this to scroll at all, this header piece. So another thing that you can do, and we're just gonna put this in here real quick. And we're gonna anchor this behind the header. So I've got these two components here. And what we can do is we can set them to fixed position when scrolling. So we don't want this to move while it scrolls, so everything will scroll underneath it. And you know what? We'll just do that for now. So now you'll see in my layer structure, it has that fixed position now, and then the list will scroll that is scrollable. These are the things that won't scroll. And I put this rectangle in the background here to just act like a mask, so everything that goes underneath it should just get clipped out like that. So now we've got this scrolling. I can scroll my list. This comes up. Let's do a couple of other things to get this to feel a little bit more realistic. All right, so we have this details panel here, and we have this, and the idea is that when I click on this, I want to trigger this details panel to come up. So now, since this was built in Figma, I have access to all the items in the layer structure here. And so now I can select this component, this button, and use that as my hitbox. I don't have to add anything else to it. So this is the nice thing when you're in these hi-fi prototypes or these hi-fi builds and you've built everything in Figma, you've got access to all these little items and all these little components that you can use as triggers, right? So we're gonna bring this up. I'm gonna click on this. I want this to do another, this will be on tap. We want this to be an overlay. We're gonna do a couple other things. We'll anchor it to the bottom center. We'll close when we click outside of it. And we're gonna add a background behind this overlay. So this is like when you're setting up modals or you've got panels coming out and you wanna dim out the background, you can do that by adding this color in here. And then we still want it to move in. A couple other things we're gonna pre-set up on this before we go and test it out again is I also want this X here, so this little icon to close out. I want this to actually close the overlay. So I can do that to close out the overlay, or you can have it to go back a screen. So those are both different things you can do depending on how you've got things set up. But for now, we're just gonna do it to close the overlay. So now we get into our prototype, we've got our button comes up, I can scroll, and now I can click this, and I've got my panel that comes up that I can enter event and team details here. And now it's starting to feel a little bit more realistic in how an app would actually function and work. Well, let's try to do some more exciting things here. So for example, we're gonna bring this over here. So I'm just doing an option drag to make a copy of this detail panel, and I'm gonna make sure I name this right. Sport select, and then I'm gonna do this as well, and we'll do this as pickup game select. So we're creating these frames to be different states in our prototype. So when when somebody clicks on a sport, we want this to highlight and essentially go to that next screen. So I'm gonna grab this plate here that's in this sport selection, and I'm gonna turn off the stroke. So I'm editing this component, and I'm gonna say, highlight that whole item there. So now when I'm on this screen, I want it to be an actual click action. When we click here, I want it to highlight accurately. You could do this with another overlay component, but we're gonna do it sort of in this linear path. This is sort of an easier way and a less complicated way to do it. So on tap, we're going to swap with, and we're not gonna have it move in, we just want it to be instantaneous. So we just want those two frames to switch when we do that click. And then just for making sure that we've got everything set up, if I click back on it, I wanna go here, you'll see it automatically snaps to the open overlay, but we don't want it to do that. We want it to be a swap with and instantaneous as well. So now when we get in here and we bring up our panel, we can select our sport, we can unselect our sport, right? So we can start making some more advanced features, and we can start adding some things here to make it feel more like an app. The next thing that we're probably gonna wanna do is we wanna add some type. So actually, you know what? Let me delete this one and copy this one because we wanna do it off of this state here. So we wanna have it where we are entering the event title. So we're gonna take this input field and we're gonna set it to selected, and we're gonna set it to no text in it yet. And we're gonna set that input field to be the trigger that does that. So when we come here, we're gonna do a similar thing on tap. We're going to swap with, and we're gonna do that instantaneous. So we can have that input field be selected. And let's change this so we can have type. And we're just gonna call this 01, and you'll see why I'm naming it 01. So then once we get into that selected field, we wanna simulate standard mobile operating system features. So I have this keyboard that I brought in. So once this is selected and we've moved to this frame, I wanna bring this keyboard up as another overlay essentially. So we're gonna do an on tap, we are going to open an overlay. We're going to set it up to be bottom centered. And we're going to have it move in. And I don't know the exact speed of the iOS keyboard that comes up, but it seems pretty snappy. So we'll do like 100 ms. And we're going to move it up. So 100 milliseconds, and we want it to come up on the screen. Seems pretty quick. Maybe it's a little bit less than that, but it should be good for us. All right, so we were setting that up. And now when we reset, we go here, we can click this. And then when I select this, oh, we didn't set it up on a delay. So we're going to set that up on a delay, and we're going to do this on 100 ms as well. So now let's set it up, go here, select this, and our keyboard comes up. So that's the nice thing is you can keep your prototype open while you're making these changes and edits. So you can constantly be clicking through and changing and adjusting these features. One of the things that Figma also has is Smart Animate, the ability to change and make transitions and screens and do more advanced animation features. So for example, we're gonna I'm gonna copy this screen over, and we're gonna delete this link here. And we're gonna delete this here. Actually, hold on before I copy this over. We're gonna delete this. So we're gonna do that same keyboard, but we're gonna do it in Smart Animate instead. And I'll show you why we're gonna do it that way in a second. So I'm gonna go back to my design, and I'm gonna bring this into my frame here and kind of line it up to where the keyboard would be. And then I'm gonna bring it here to where it would be as well. I'm gonna go to this frame and actually move it down below my frame content, just so it stays off the screen. So now when I go and click this here on tap, I want it to swap with, but I want to use Smart Animate. Now what Smart Animate is going to do, it's going to take all the layers that you have in your layout. It's going to look at the names, and it's going to see what things changed between those two things. And it's going to essentially lerp between those two changes. So here we have our keyboard, and the keyboard should move up just like it did before when we go ahead and click on that. So we're going to go here, run through the prototype again, and we click here, keyboard comes in. You notice that this transitioned out smoothly with the component that was there. So we simulated that same exact thing. The reason we're doing it this way is because now I want to, one of the biggest things with prototypes is like type doesn't feel real. So it's hard to get type to feel authentic in there. So we want somebody to hit the keyboard, and we want it to feel like it's typed in some stuff. So we can do this with Smart Animate. Now there are very complicated prototypes hooked up where it feels like you're actually typing, and it's very, very complicated. There's actually a Figma community file with the example out there. But this is a way that we can do it to make it feel like we're actually typing in something, because that's one of the downsides of design prototypes, is it just doesn't feel like anyone's typing anything in. So we're going to name this Wisconsin. Oh, Wisconsin Startup Week 1-on-1. All right, so we're going to change it to that. We're going to go to setting up, making sure that this is 100% because we've typed something in. And we're going to use Smart Animate to have this automatically fill out. So it'll be empty here, and then we are not going to do an on drag here. So let me delete that, delete that. The little minus will allow you to delete out different interactions you might have. So clicking this keyboard, we are going to do a swap with, and we're going to do another Smart Animate. And we are just going to have it, yeah, ease out, looks good. And we probably want it to be a little bit slower on there. So now when we click on the keyboard, oh, our text just rolled in, but that way it feels like it typed everything in. So now you can make those sort of transitions and make adjustments there. So Smart Animate allows us to do a lot of really cool things to make things feel really realistic. So I'm going to go to sort of, this is a more substantial prototype that I hooked up ahead of time, using elements of Smart Animate and kind of showing how a full setup could be. So I'm going to close this one out and we'll just show this as an example. And then we'll have some time for questions and any specific things that somebody might want to see how to set up. So here we're going to leverage Smart Animate to have a nice roll up for the logo. We're going to have the list come in. We have the Submit Gamer Leagues come in, still scrollable. Here we didn't do the cropping, so we have the scrollable here. We can click to submit a new event. When you're in a prototype, if you don't ever know where to click, you can click off of that main frame and then you can see where you should click. When we're doing user interviews or UX studies, that's one thing that we always preface ahead of time is we'll say, this is a prototype, it's static, it's not a real app. So if you ever don't know where you can click, if you click somewhere, the blue boxes will highlight and kind of show you where your options are. A lot of times we'll hook up things really complicated, so that's not the case, but it's a thing that always kind of comes up in conversation. So I select my sport, I can toggle between these here. I can click here and get into my keyboard. I have it here, just auto typing it out, so I don't have to worry about that. When I click on the keyboard, I just have it fill out the rest, kind of quickly kind of going through it. If I was doing this as an actual UX study, we'd probably set up every input field to have it go in there. We might even bring in some automated autofill options if that's something we were leveraging. We're gonna hit submit. We've got our new event, and then we're automatically pulling up the event card. So that we threw it up here, and this event card comes up, and then we can add a share here. So this way it starts to feel like a real product, and we can actually get it out in front of people and get that feedback from our actual users, get some early validation on what we think works and doesn't work, and then just get a feel like, does it work? Is it too many things moving? Does it get the job done in an adequate amount of steps, or is it too many steps, or is it not enough steps? Is it too much information overload? You can't really feel that stuff out until we can get into this prototyping phase and start clicking through things. So that being said, I do want to open up the last 15, 20 minutes here for Q&A because I know there's a lot of complicated prototype stuff that we can talk about, and hopefully we have some questions about setting things up. Or if you want to talk about validation and how we test a lot of this stuff, I can talk to a little bit of that as well.
Billy, we do have one question that came up from YouTube like 10 minutes ago or so. They asked, how fast should you build a prototype? Of course, it depends on the project size, but what's like a good timeline for creating a prototype?
A good timeline. So at least the way we kind of work is we're always prototyping as we're building. So it's kind of always there and it's always in the mindset. Because a lot of our stuff is, right, we're handing it off to external clients and they're in our Figma files, so they have complete access to everything, but we always want to show them what the product's going to look like and feel like. So even when we're setting up some early stage mock-ups or early stage just conceptual pieces, we try to always send a prototype link. So we're always in that prototype phase. A lot of time you'll see we'll be building stuff out and prototyping as we go. If you're building a prototype, let's say you got your whole product designed out and everything's built out and you're just like going to set up your prototype, I mean, you could spend an entire day setting up a prototype, especially if it's very complicated. We've done some pretty complicated prototypes that can eat up a lot of time. So that's always something to sort of be, to be conscious of. But there are things that can help speed up your prototypes, especially in Figma. So for example, if let's say we wanted to add a bottom navigation, I'm gonna actually go here, just to speed things up. Let's say we wanted to add a bottom navigation to the bottom of our app here instead of this submit games or leagues component. I'm just going to do this that very hacky way. You can set up prototype triggers in components so they get reused everywhere, right? So we've got 3 sport options in here, and I'm gonna turn this into a component. And then what I'm going to do is in this component, I'm gonna delete all of this. I will hook this up to be going to this screen. We'll call this page 1. Page, well, I don't know why my backspace isn't working, but page 2. Page 3. And we'll hook, let's actually do this one to page 1. We'll go to this second one here. And we'll bring this to page 2. Open overlay. And then we'll bring this to page 3. And we'll open an overlay. So now you've got your main component set up to be this prototype link. So every time you make a child object of it, it's already hooked up. So you can have multiple screens that use this child object to set up pretty advanced prototypes very quickly. So a lot of times we'll take components from our design system, bring them in, make another component of that component just for the prototype, hook everything up that way. So we don't have to worry about constantly updating and changing prototypes, and it just helps speed things up. Because now I don't have to set up every bottom nav to do that. If I had that bottom nav on 100 screens, I only set it up once and it drove everything.
Awesome. We got a question from Michelle. I don't know if you can see in the chat there. She was asking about desktop prototypes. Where they may, for desktop prototypes where there may be less buttons and more scrolling, do you have any suggestions on how to keep things exciting for usability testing participants?
Desktop, how to keep things more exciting. I think a lot of it comes into the prototype is like setting up different hover states. So this is mobile, right? So it doesn't have any hover states, but making sure that we set up all of our hover states. And I can show an example of that as well. So I'm gonna pull one of these out and we'll make this to be pretty, so it's noticeable. And we'll go to this prototype and then we are going to, we're gonna do this while hovering. And we will just open an overlay and we are going to set it to be manual. So it's going to open up over the top of that. And then we will leave the rest of those things. But now when we get to this screen, uh-oh, did we not go to the screen? You can set up an overlay up over the top, but let me see, why is this not working? Let's drag this out. And then we're gonna hide this. There might be something that's a little bit weird with the way this auto layout is set up. And we'll just have this here. Oh, I know why. I didn't launch a prototype from this screen. I was still in the other one. So setting up different hover states and making sure that when they're moving their mouse around the screen, it feels as realistic as possible. So when we do a lot of desktop apps, and that's where this like setting up a navigation. So let's say you have a left-hand navigation on the side. You don't want to set up the hover state for every single screen that's on there. So setting that up once, having that drive all the screens, you can make it more exciting and more engaging and feel more real. Same thing with like the inputs, you know, making sure that there's hover states on inputs or selected states when they click into it. So it's a lot of just doing that state management to make it feel more exciting. And bringing more movement into it. Another thing with prototypes is you can have animated GIFs in them as well, and they'll run and operate within there. So like if you had a loader, a loading state, you can bring that into your prototype with and it'll run and animate. So there's different strategies you can do to set that up, and like a time delay, so you can have that loading GIF show up and things like that. So there's a lot of different things to do on the desktop side. It's actually probably more complicated on the desktop side because you're setting up so many more different states of things, whether it be hover states, using Smart Animate to do transitions when like hovering over a car, and maybe adding a drop shadow and bringing it up. So there's just a lot more interactions you can do.
Awesome, thanks, Billy. So I noticed we had a question from YouTube, or somebody was talking about Protopie before, and I see there's a question also in the Q&A here, so between YouTube and Zoom. But Nicholas asks, why to use Figma to prototype rather than a prototype tool such as Framer or Protopie?
So the reason we choose to stay in Figma, one is like a tool overload, right? So like we can use a lot of different tools, and you know, we have to, like, let's say we're using Whimsical to wireframe. If we chose to do that, a lot of times we'll just wireframe directly in Figma, and then you're doing your high fidelity stuff in Figma, and then you're doing your prototype in a different tool. It's just a lot of tools to be switching through. And sometimes we will dive into different tools if there's something that Figma can't do and we need to explicitly communicate something. So for example, we had a project where one of our designers wanted to have a gradient adjustment that acted a certain way, and it just couldn't be accomplished in Figma. So we'll dive into a tool like that to do that. But for the most part, our designs live in Figma, our wireframes live in Figma, our clients are in Figma leaving comments and giving feedback. And so all our prototypes are in there. Not saying that none of those tools aren't great. There's some amazing things you can do in those. It's just a choice that we take so we can try to be as efficient as possible. And like I said, we'll dive into them if there's something that we really need to communicate that we just can't in Figma.
Awesome, thanks, Billy. Next one is from James. It's so powerful looking as a designer. How does this compare with other apps in terms of the coders and database people during the handoff stage to developers?
Yeah, so we'll do a lot of prototypes for developers to communicate a lot of things as well. And we'll even use prototyping stuff to bring up certain communications for developers. So I'm gonna load up a plugin here just to get two things in here real quick. So I'm gonna add a new annotation and say dev note. Hey, here is something you should look at. And I'm gonna add new. So now we got my dev note here. So now when, yeah, it's not in the frame, so let me delete that one. So a lot of times we'll bring in some of these notes into the prototyping tools as well. So I'm gonna bring this note here. So now you'll see that it's in here. And then we'll set this up to be like an on hover. So while hovering, open overlay, yep, centered is fine. We'll add a black background behind it. So when our developers are clicking through, they can get the dev notes in context. So that's another way that you can leverage the prototyping and get that feedback out to developers. Then we'll also share out just the normal screens, which will have notes like this on the side as well, and maybe some additional details in there. But that's a way that, like, if they're looking at a prototype and we want to communicate to your developers after a handoff session, we'll always meet first and go through everything, have discussion, talk with the developers, ask what needs to be done. But then if we're working on like a complicated enterprise app, there might be notes in here that's like, hey, here's, and the developers could even add notes to us where they're saying, for here, we're pulling this from this API or this database or this feature set, and we can leave those notes in here. So as everyone's working through and looking at the prototype, they can see what sort of the requirements for the screens.
Awesome. I think Christine also has a very similar question. What, if anything, can continue to be used from Figma as you move out of the prototype to the next stage of development? So I think, and I kind of share, we're actually going to be talking about that next month. Billy and Chris are going to talk about like how the design team hands off a project. What is that collaboration like? How do we communicate? How do we set up the development team for success so that we build the right thing the first time? So yeah.
Yeah, and we actually talk We get in sync with our developers very early on in the process. We are starting to investigate how can we bring tokens directly from Figma to the development environment so that they're pulling stuff directly from Figma. And excuse me, our designers are kind of there along with our developers, working through everything together. So a lot of meetings, a lot of sync ups, a lot of recording walkthroughs and things to make sure that we're always communicating the right thing. And a lot of our projects, we're continually iterating on them. So there's a lot of things changing. So there's a lot of just really close collaboration and a lot of really close communication all the way through. But a lot of times if you can't have that, just leaving notes in here or leaving notes like I just showed in the prototype to help have those asynchronous communications are very, very helpful.
Yeah, I don't see any more questions from YouTube or in the Q&A or in the chat. If anyone has one more question, otherwise we can wrap it up.
Yeah, and feel free, like I said, or like Jacob said, feel free to reach out if you have any questions on prototyping or anything generally in Figma. We'd love to help. Just want to share everything we know with everybody.
Oh, we got one question that came in. What advice / suggestions would you give to a UX designer wannabe?
Advice / suggestions to a UX designer wannabe. Get in the tools and start making stuff. Like find some passion project, find something that you want to make, even if it's not ever going to turn into anything real. Just get in there, make some stuff, try to follow some of the processes that, like test your ideas early, have friends and family check it out in a prototype, and just kind of do that stuff. I feel iterations or reps, the more reps you go through the process, the more refined you'll get at it. Reach out to other designers, ask questions. I know there's a lot of designers who will answer a lot of questions on Twitter. Follow people on YouTube. There's a lot of great designers out on YouTube sharing a ton of content of how to just go through the whole process. So.
I just shared a link in the chat there. The best books for learning new design methods that Katie had written on our blog. Got a lot of great books on like UX, like human-centered design, stuff like that. A lot of great research stuff just to kind of like, as you're making things, to help you think differently about how you make things, how do you test ideas, talk to customers, stuff like that. So awesome. He also asked, thank you for your reply, but what any mistakes I should avoid?
Any mistakes?
Yeah, I mean, we all make mistakes, but
no, just get in them, get in there, like make mistakes, learn from those mistakes. I think like just continually doing it and refining it and just getting in there is the best thing you're ever gonna do. And you're gonna make mistakes. If you're anything, I'm definitely one of those people where I look at things I designed like a year ago and I'm like, oh man, this could have been so much better. Because you just learn and you grow and you just get more knowledge, you get more practice, you get better ideas, you see what other people are doing that's really cool and exciting. Download some of the latest apps or check out different web projects and just try to be in the community and see what's happening. But you're going to make mistakes and you're going to learn from them. And that's the biggest thing. Never look at a mistake as like a failure, but an opportunity to improve something your next time around.
Awesome. I think, this will be our last question. We'll wrap things up. But Stephanie asks, can you talk about the different questions you ask users during usability testing, concept tests, A/B testing, and stuff like that?
Yeah, so a lot of our testing, we try to be objective based. So we'll sometimes make a scorecard for a prototype. So like, for example, let's say we're going to take this app and we are going to do a usability testing. We might want to say like, hey, we want somebody to find a soccer game on Wednesday nights. And we would set that up as the scenario or the objective for our users. And then we'd create a scorecard on how well were they able to do that. You know, obviously the app would be more advanced than this quick mock-up that we made for this presentation. But then that's one of the questions we'd ask. That would come after some just like, hey, how do you normally find soccer games? How do you play? How do you get into leagues? What are you, you know, there's a whole like process that would happen before this. But once we're in the design, a lot of the times it's like, hey, you've already downloaded this. Maybe your friend told you about it, but we want you to try to do this one objective in there. We want you to try this other objective in there. And that's what we'll test. A/B testing is the same thing. Like we'll kind of set some objectives or some tests. So like, let's say instead of this sort of row style, we did cards or something else. We might ask like, you know, start measuring how long did it take somebody to find a soccer match that they wanted to join, or how easy was it for somebody to do the filtering to get down to the right thing. So a lot of it is around, can we measure it with some, you know, we try not to be too subjective about it, but it's like, can we actually add sort of some sort of measure to the question we're asking, or the objective we're trying to give the user.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Billy. Great answers, great questions, everybody. So as a reminder, this was recorded. It'll be available on our YouTube channel in the near future. We'll also be sending an email out with this recording of the presentation and some notes of some of the things that we talked about today. So thanks again for everyone for tuning in, and be sure to check out other events from Headway. We have more coming up on YouTube Live next week, and check out our website, headway.io. We have events every month about product strategy, design, and development, and we look forward to seeing you again. So take care, everybody.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.